The final silence was different from all the others that had fallen over the chamber during the trial. This silence was heavy with the weight of cosmic responsibility. Representatives sat motionless in their seats, no longer seeing the human defendant as a primitive troublemaker, but as someone who had just challenged the very foundation of everything they believed about law, order, and survival. The chamber itself seemed to respond to the gravity of the moment. The crystal walls dimmed slightly, and the floating platform stopped their gentle movement. Even the energy beings of the ethereal collective had become completely still, their usual flickering patterns frozen like they were holding their breath. Chief Judge Valtar finally spoke. His voice carried the accumulated wisdom of countless eons, but also a new uncertainty that had never been there. Before human Deho, you have presented evidence that challenges our fundamental understanding of how civilized beings should behave. But before we can make any decisions, there is one question that must be answered. What question, Your Honor? If we accept what you have told us, that humans are necessary for galactic survival, what guarantee do we have that your species will not abuse this freedom? What prevents humanity from becoming the very threat you claim to protect us from? Deho had been waiting for this question. He could see it in the faces around him, the fear that lay beneath all their other concerns, the worry that giving humans permission to break rules would lead to chaos and destruction. Their honor, I would like to tell you about the most important human you have never heard of. Her name is Na-Yun, and she is a maintenance engineer on a small mining station. In the Outer Rim territories, the light pictures changed to show a simple space station that looked like thousands of others scattered throughout the galaxy. There was nothing special or impressive about it, just a basic facility where people worked and lived far from the centers of galactic power. 6 months ago, Na-Yun discovered that the station waste disposal system was leaking dangerous chemicals into the local asteroid field. The contamination was slowly poisoning the water supply for 3 nearby colonies. According to regulations, she should have reported the problem to her supervisors, who would have filed a report with the sector authorities, who would have eventually scheduled an inspection. The display showed the spreading contamination. It was clear that the poison would reach the colonies long before any official response could be organized. The process would have taken 8 months. The colonies would have been completely unlivable within 6 months, so Na-Yun did what humans do. She fixed the problem herself using methods that violated safety protocols, environmental regulations, and territorial boundaries. Another rule-breaking human, the Malarian delegate, observed, but there was no mockery in her voice anymore. Yes, Deho agreed, but here is the part that answers your question, Your Honor. After Na-Yun fixed the problem, she did not try to take credit. She did not demand recognition or rewards. She filed a complete report detailing everything she had done, including all the rules she had broken. She recommended that she should be disciplined for violating regulations. The chamber stirred with surprise. This was not what any of them had expected. A human who solved a major problem and then asked to be punished for it. When the sector authorities investigated, they found that Na-Yun had not only solved the immediate problem, but had identified 17 other potential contamination sites throughout the sector. Her report led to system-wide improvements that prevented dozens of environmental disasters. The light pictures showed the improved systems spreading across multiple star systems. The changes were clearly making life better and safer for millions of people. Na-Yun was offered a promotion, a transfer to a prestigious position, and recognition as a sector hero. She turned down all of it. She said she was just doing her job, and she asked to be allowed to continue doing maintenance work because that was where she could do the most good. Ho looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every representative. That is your answer, Your Honor. Humans do not break rules because we want power or recognition. We break rules because we cannot stand to watch people suffer when we know we can help, and when we are done helping, we go back to our regular lives and wait for the next problem that needs solving. The ethereal collective energy patterns shifted to something that might have been understanding. You are suggesting that human rule breaking is self-limiting, that your species has built-in ethical controls. I am suggesting that humans are the only species that has learned to be responsibly irresponsible. Deho replied. We will break any rule to save lives, but we will not break rules just for our own benefit. We will risk everything to solve problems, but we will not create problems Just to prove we can solve them, the Vorthak ambassador stood up slowly, his crystalline form reflecting the chamber lights in complex patterns. His voice, when he spoke, was no longer angry, but filled with a kind of desperate confusion. Human, what you are asking us to do is unprecedented. You want us to officially allow rule-breaking. You want us to change laws that have maintained galactic peace for millions of years. I want you to survive. Deho replied simply, the Void Plague will not be the last existential threat you face. There will be others, and when they come, you will need someone who can find solutions that do not exist yet. You will need someone who can break the rules that are keeping you from saving yourselves. He paused, then continued with quiet intensity that somehow reached every corner of the massive chamber. But more than that, I want you to understand something about the choice you are making here. This is not just about humans. This is about what kind of galaxy you want to live in. Do you want a galaxy where the rules are more important than the people they are supposed to protect, or do you want a galaxy where someone will always be willing to risk everything to save everyone else? The chamber fell silent for what everyone knew would be the final time. Representatives looked at each other, communicating through subtle gestures and energy patterns that had been developed over millions of years. The weight of the decision was enormous, and everyone understood that whatever happened next would change the galaxy forever. The Kithra representative was the first to speak. Her feathers had settled into a pattern that other bird-like species would recognize as deep contemplation. Human, you have shown us that our system, while excellent at maintaining order, is poorly designed for handling crises that do not follow established patterns. But how can we be certain that allowing humans to operate outside our laws will not lead to greater chaos? Because chaos is not the opposite of order. Deho replied, chaos is what happens when order fails to adapt. Humans are not agents of chaos, we are agents of change, and change is the only thing that can save a system when that system is no longer working. The Malarian delegate's slime trail had turned a thoughtful purple color. You speak of change as if it were always beneficial, but change can also be destructive. How do we know that human solutions will not cause more problems than they solve? You do not know, Deho admitted. That is the point. You cannot know whether a solution will work until you try it. Your system tries to avoid all risk. By planning everything carefully, our system accepts risk, because we understand that sometimes the biggest risk is doing nothing. The ethereal collective flickered with rapid energy patterns that indicated intense internal debate. Finally they spoke. In unison, their combined consciousness reaching a conclusion. Human Deho, you have presented a compelling argument, but you are asking us to fundamentally change the nature of galactic civilization. The implications are vast and potentially dangerous. I understand, Deho replied, but the alternative is worse. The universe does not care about your laws. Natural disasters, cosmic phenomena, and existential threats do not follow galactic regulations. They require solutions that are fast, creative, and completely outside the bounds of normal procedure. He gestured to the light pictures still floating above them, showing all the crises that humans had solved. Every single one of these problems could have been solved by your existing authorities if they had been willing to break their own rules, but they were not willing, and so people suffered and died while committees debated and bureaucrats filed paperwork. Chief Judge Veltar spoke slowly, his ancient voice heavy with the weight of cosmic responsibility. Human, what you are proposing would require us to create a new category of law recognition that some problems are too important for normal procedures, but such a system would be extremely dangerous if we give any species the authority to decide when rules can be broken. We risk destroying everything we have built. Then do not give us that authority, Deho said. Let us keep operating the way we always have. Without official permission, we will continue to solve problems that threaten innocent lives, and you can continue to prosecute us for it afterward. The only difference is that now you know why we do it. The suggestion was so unexpected that it caught everyone off guard. A species that was asking not for official recognition or legal protection, but simply for understanding. The trial that had begun with the expectation of a quick conviction had become something entirely different. It was no longer about punishing humanity for breaking galactic law. It was about deciding whether the galaxy wanted to acknowledge that sometimes breaking the law was the most moral thing a person could do. You Would accept prosecution for saving lives, the Vorthek ambassador asked. We have always. The silence stretched for what felt like hours. Representatives sat in their seats or floated on their platforms, trying to process the enormous weight of what they had just learned. The Void Plague, a threat that had haunted their worst nightmares, for decades had been stopped by a species they had dismissed as primitive. Troublemakers. Chief Judge Veltar was the first to speak. His ancient voice carried a weight that seemed to press down on everyone in the chamber. Human, the things you have told us are beyond anything we could have imagined. If your story is true, then humanity has done something for the galaxy that cannot be measured. But this creates more questions than it answers. I am here to answer those questions, Deho replied. But first you need to understand something basic about why humans are different from every other species in this galaxy. The light pictures changed to show Earth, the small blue world where humanity had been born. The planet looked tiny and fragile compared to the massive homeworlds of the other galactic species. Every species in this chamber evolved under different conditions, but you all have one thing in common. You developed space travel after you had already solved the major problems on your home planets. You achieved peace, prosperity, and stability before you reached for the stars. Images of various alien homeworlds appeared. Each one showed advanced civilizations that were perfectly ordered and peaceful. There were no signs of conflict or chaos. Everything was clean, organized, and controlled. Humans are different. We left Earth while we were still fighting among ourselves. We took our conflicts, our chaos, and our problems with us into space. You see this as a weakness, but it is actually our greatest strength. The ethereal collective energy patterns shifted to what looked like curiosity mixed with confusion. Explain this contradiction. Human, how can chaos be stronger than order? Because chaos teaches you to solve problems under pressure. Deho replied, when everything is falling apart around you, you learn to think fast, adapt quickly, and find solutions that nobody else would consider. You learn that sometimes the only way to save something is to risk destroying. I've gestured to the display, which now showed human colonies scattered across the galaxy. Each colony looked different from the others. Some were built in impossible places, like the hearts of asteroid fields or the surfaces of planets that should have been uninhabitable. Every human settlement exists because someone was willing to risk everything on an impossible dream. Captain Haiyan-Wu, who established the first human colony in the Vega system, was told that the planet could not support life. He went anyway and figured out how to make it work. Dr. So Young, who developed the techniques that made the Kepler colonies possible, was told that her theories were scientifically impossible. She proved them wrong by actually doing it. The Malarian delegate shifted uncomfortably, leaving a trail of nervous slime. But surely this recklessness must lead to failures, disasters, people dying for no good reason. Of course it does, Deho admitted without any shame. Humans fail constantly. We make mistakes, we take risks that do not work out, and sometimes people die because of our decisions. But here is what you do not understand. We learn from our failures faster than you learn from your successes. The light pictures showed a timeline of human expansion, marking both the great successes and the terrible disasters. The colony ship Tebek was lost trying to reach the Tau Ceti system. 40,000 people died because Captain Dong Haiyan decided to try an untested route through a dangerous asteroid field. It was a complete disaster, but the data from that disaster led to the development of new navigation techniques that have saved millions of lives since then. The chamber buzzed with uncomfortable conversations. This was a completely alien way of thinking to most of the representatives. The idea of learning from failure instead of just trying to prevent it was difficult for them to understand. We do not celebrate disasters, Deho continued. We learn from them. That is the difference. When you fail, you form committees to make sure it never happens again. When humans fail, we figure out how to fail better next time. The Vorthak ambassador crystal body was still vibrating with confusion, but there must be some control, some authority that prevents humans from making decisions that could endanger others. There is, Deho said, and for the first time since the trial began, he smiled with genuine warmth. But it is not the kind of authority you would expect. The light pictures changed to show a simple space station orbiting a distant asteroid. The station looked ordinary and unremarkable, like thousands of others scattered throughout human space. 6 months ago, a maintenance engineer named Na Yun discovered that her station waste disposal system was leaking toxic materials into the local asteroid field. The contamination was slowly poisoning the water supply for 3 nearby colonies. According to regulations, she should have reported the problem to her supervisors, who would have filed a report with the sector authorities, who would have eventually scheduled an inspection. The display showed the spreading contamination pattern. It was clear that the poison would reach the colonies long before any official response could be organized. The process would have taken 8 months. The colonies would have been completely uninhabitable within 6 months. So Na-Yun did what humans do. She fixed the problem herself using techniques that violated safety protocols, environmental regulations, and territorial boundaries. Another rule-breaking human, the Malarian delegate, observed, but her tone was not mocking anymore. Yes, Daeho agreed. But here is the part that answers your question about control. Your honor, after Na-Yun fixed the problem, she did not try to take credit. She did not demand recognition or reward. She filed a complete report detailing everything she had done, including all the rules she had broken. She recommended that she should be punished for violating regulations. The chamber stirred with surprise. This was not what they had expected. When the sector authorities investigated, they found that Na-Yun had not only solved the immediate problem, but had identified 17 other potential contamination sites throughout the sector. Her report led to improvements that prevented dozens of environmental disasters. The light pictures showed the improved systems spreading across multiple star systems. The changes were clearly making life better and safer for millions of people. Na-Yun was offered a promotion, a transfer to an important position, and recognition as a sector hero. She turned down all of it. She said she was just doing her job, and she asked to be allowed to continue doing maintenance work because that was where she could help the most. Daeho looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every representative. That is your answer. Your honor, humans do not break rules because we want power or recognition. We break rules because we cannot stand to watch people suffer when we know we can help. And when we are done helping, we go back to our regular lives and wait for the next problem that needs solving. The ethereal collective energy patterns shifted to something that might have been understanding. You are suggesting that human rule-breaking has natural limits, that your species has built-in ethical controls. I am suggesting that humans are the only species that has learned to be responsibly irresponsible. Daeho replied, we will break any rule to save lives, but we will not break rules just for our own benefit. We will risk everything to solve problems, but we will not create problems just to prove we can solve them. The Vorthek ambassador stood up slowly, his crystal form reflecting the chamber. Lights in complex patterns. Human, what you are asking us to do has never been done before. You want us to officially allow rule-breaking. You want us to change laws that have kept galactic peace for millions of years. I want you to survive, Daeho replied. Simply, the Void Plague will not be the last threat you face. There will be others, and when they come, you will need someone who can find solutions that do not exist yet. You will need someone who can break the rules that are keeping you from saving yourselves. He paused, then continued with quiet intensity. But more than that, I want you to understand something about the choice you are making here. This is not just about humans. This is about what kind of galaxy you want to live in. Do you want a galaxy where the rules are more important than the people they are supposed to protect? Or do you want a galaxy where someone will always be willing to risk everything to save everyone else? The chamber fell silent for what everyone knew would be the final time. The weight of the decision was enormous, and everyone understood that whatever happened next would change the galaxy forever. Asterisk, the light pictures floating above the chamber changed to show a section of space that made every representative in the room freeze in terror. It was the dark sector, a region of space that had been marked as completely off limits for the past 50 years. The reason for the restriction was classified at the highest levels of galactic government. Only the most powerful leaders knew the truth about what was hidden there. The Void Plague, Daeho said quietly, and the chamber fell into a silence so complete that it felt like the universe itself had stopped breathing. You all know about it, but you have kept it secret from your own people. A form of dark energy that eats entire star systems, leaving nothing but empty space behind it, has been growing steadily for 5 decades, and according to your own scientists, it will reach inhabited space within the next 20 years. The Vorthik Ambassador Crystal Body began to shake so violently that it sounded like a building was falling down. Human. That information is classified beyond any clearance level. How do you possibly know about the void? Because 3 months ago, human explorer Ji-hoon Park was not supposed to be in the dark sector. Dae-ho replied calmly he was chasing a distress signal from a missing research ship. He did not know the area was forbidden because nobody bothered to tell human colonies about the restriction. So he went in, found the source of the plague, and discovered something that your top scientists have been trying to figure out for 50 years. The light pictures shifted to show detailed scans of something that looked like a wound in space itself. The images were disturbing even to look at. They showed areas where stars and planets should have been, but instead there was just nothing, not empty space, but actual nothingness, as if reality itself had been eaten away. The void plague is not a natural thing. It is a weapon created by a civilization that died out millions of years ago as a last resort against an enemy that was conquering the galaxy. The weapon worked too well. It destroyed the enemy, but it also destroyed the people who made it, and now it continues to expand because nobody knows how to turn it off. Sounds of horror rippled through the chamber. The ethereal collective energy patterns were flickering so frantically that they looked like they were having some kind of breakdown. Several smaller species delegates were making distressed noises that their translators could not even convert into words. Your scientists have been trying to solve this problem the same way you solve everything else. Carefully, slowly, through proper channels, you have formed committees, commissioned studies, and developed theoretical models. And while you have been doing that, the plague has consumed 43 star systems. Chief Judge Vel Tarvoice carried a note of desperation that had never been heard from him before. Human, if you know something about stopping the plague, you must share it immediately. This threatens every life in the galaxy. I agree, Dae-ho said. That is why I am here, but here is the problem. The solution requires exactly the kind of dangerous rule-breaking behavior that you have been trying to punish us for. The only way to stop the void plague is to do something that every single one of your species would consider impossible and completely suicidal. Chamber erupted in urgent conversations. Representatives were no longer concerned about human violations of galactic law. They were terrified about the survival of their own civilizations. The careful order of the tribunal was breaking down as panic began to spread. What did your explorer discover? The Malarian delegate asked, and her slime trail was now so pale it was almost transparent. Ji-hoon found the control system, Dae-ho replied. It is located at the center of the plague in a region where the dark energy is so thick that it should be impossible for any ship to survive. Your scientists calculated that reaching the center would require technology that does not exist and energy levels that would tear apart any known material. He paused, letting the implications sink in before continuing. They were right. It is impossible for you, but not for humans. The Kithara representative feathers were now completely standing up in what was clearly a panic display. Explain. How could humans possibly survive conditions that would destroy our most advanced ships because we do not try to survive? Then Dae-ho said simply, we tried to solve the problem. Despite them, Ji-hoon did not have the technology to survive the trip to the center, so he built a ship that was designed to fall apart during the journey as long as it held together long enough to reach the target. The light pictures showed a human ship that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and held together with determination and prayer. The ship was clearly not designed for what it was being asked to do. He filled it with every human engineer he could find, not because they were the best qualified, but because they were the only ones crazy enough to try. The ship was destroyed 3 times during the trip. Each time the crew rebuilt it while flying through space. That should have killed them instantly. The display showed the impossible journey. The human ship was literally falling apart and being put back together as it pushed deeper into the plague. The images were terrifying and inspiring at the same time, showing humans working in conditions that defied every law of physics and survival. After 6 days of what should have been a suicide mission, they reached the center. They found the control system, figured out how to operate technology that was millions of years beyond their understanding, and successfully changed the plague. Programming the chamber was completely silent now. Every representative was staring at the pictures in disbelief. What they were seeing should have been impossible. No species should have been able to survive what those humans had endured. The void plague is no longer expanding, Daeho continued. In fact, it is slowly getting smaller. Within 50 years, it will be completely contained. Ji-hoon and his crew saved every civilization in the galaxy using methods that your most advanced scientists said could never work. He looked around the chamber at the stunned faces. But here's the part that really matters. They did not ask permission. They did not file reports or request permission. They did not follow proper procedures or respect territorial boundaries. They saw a problem that threatened everything they cared about, and they solved it the only way they knew how, by refusing to accept that anything was impossible. The weight of what he was saying settled over the chamber like a heavy blanket. The implications were staggering. A threat that had haunted the nightmares of galactic civilization for decades had been eliminated by a small group of humans who had simply refused to believe it could not be done. So now you understand why I'm really here, Daeho said softly. You have been trying to punish humanity for the same behavior that just saved your entire galaxy, and the question you need to answer is simple. Do you want to keep punishing us for solving problems, or do you want to learn how to solve problems the way we do? The silence that followed was the silence of minds trying to process something that changed everything they thought they knew about the universe. The trial that had begun with cosmic laughter was now about the survival of galactic civilization itself. But there was more. The look on Daeho's face suggested that the void plague was just the beginning, that there were other threats, other problems that would require the same kind of impossible solutions that only humans seemed capable of providing. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the most important rules are the ones that need to be broken. The light pictures floating above the chamber changed to show a map of the galaxy with hundreds of red and blue dots scattered across it. The red dots marked places where there had been conflicts or problems. The blue dots showed where humans had been involved. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Almost every red dot had a blue dot right next to its representatives. Throughout the chamber were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The implications of what they were seeing were starting to sink in. Humans were not just randomly causing trouble, they were showing up wherever there were problems and somehow making those problems go away. The third case, Daeho continued, and his voice was now completely confident. The Proxima Centauri food crisis, a plant disease, destroyed the crops on 6 farming worlds that fed over 2 billion people. The Ethereal Collective, as the governing authority, followed proper procedures. They formed a committee, commissioned studies, and began developing a solution that would take 3 years to finish. The Ethereal Collective energy patterns shifted to what looked like defensive formations. The colors flowing through their cloud like bodies became sharper and more angular. Dr. Soo-Jin Kim, a human plant scientist, was on vacation in that area when she heard about the crisis. She had no authority, no official position, and no government support. What she did have was a simple idea that everyone else had said was too dangerous. The light pictures showed a small human research ship approaching one of the dying worlds. The planet's surface was brown and gray where it should have been green. The cities were dark and quiet. Instead of trying to develop a completely new solution, she suggested using a modified version of an earth plant that was naturally resistant to the disease. The Ethereal Collective called it dangerous genetic contamination and irresponsible experimentation. Dr. Kim called it preventing 2 billion people from starving to death. The display showed before and after images of the affected worlds. The change was amazing. In the before pictures, the planets looked dead and empty. In the after pictures, they were covered with healthy green plants and the cities were bright with lights again. She put her solution into effect without permission in 3 months. The crops grew successfully, the disease was gone, and nobody starved. The Ethereal Collective 3-year study concluded that her approach was not only effective, but actually better than their planned solution. But by then it did not matter because the problem was already solved. The chamber was quieter now, but the tension in the air was so thick you could almost touch it. The delegates were no longer arguing among themselves. They were all staring at Daeho with expressions that ranged from worry to fear. Chief Judge Veltar spoke carefully, choosing each word, like he was walking through a field full of explosives. Human, even if these examples are accurate, they represent a dangerous way of thinking. What happens when human intuition is wrong? What happens when your reckless methods 'Cause more harm than good. Day-ho expression grew serious for the first time since he had begun speaking. That is a fair question. Your Honor, and I have an answer, but first I need to tell you about the real reason I am here. Because everything I have shown you so far is just background information. The real story is about what we discovered while we were out there, solving problems that everyone else was ignoring. He paused and looked around the chamber at faces that were no longer laughing. We found something that threatens every single civilization in this galaxy, something that your careful procedures and diplomatic processes cannot handle, something that requires exactly the kind of dangerous, rule-breaking, impossible solutions that humans are good at. The silence that followed was complete. Even the ethereal collective had stopped their constant energy flickering, and the worst part, you have known about it for decades. You have been trying to handle it through proper channels and official procedures while it gets stronger every day, but you cannot solve this problem with committees and regulations. You can only solve it with humans. The words hit the chamber like a physical blow. Several delegates started speaking at once, but Day-ho continued talking over their protests. The fourth case, the Kepler 438 mining disaster, a poorly designed extraction operation caused a chain reaction that threatened to destroy an entire star system. The local government followed emergency protocols. They evacuated non-essential personnel, filed disaster reports, and requested technical assistance from the Galactic Engineering Council. The light pictures showed a star system where something had gone terribly wrong. One of the planets was glowing with unnatural light, and the space around it was filled with dangerous energy. The Engineering Council estimated that containing the disaster would require 18 months of careful preparation and the construction of specialized equipment. Captain Heian Wu of the human engineering ship Taebaek estimated that the system would be completely destroyed in 6 weeks. The display showed a human ship that looked like it had been built in someone's garage compared to the sleek alien vessels. The human ship was flying directly into the most dangerous part of the disaster area using methods that every expert called suicidal. Captain Han Wu and his crew flew into the heart of the disaster and manually shut down the reaction. The process should have killed them instantly. The radiation levels alone were beyond what any known technology could protect against. The pictures showed humans in bulky, primitive-looking suits working with equipment that was clearly not designed for the conditions they were facing. Some of the humans were clearly getting sick from the radiation, but they kept working, but they did not die. Because they did not try to survive the radiation, they used it. The human crew figured out how to turn the deadly energy into power for their equipment. They used the disaster itself to fix the disaster. The chamber was completely silent now. Every delegate was staring at the display in shock. The idea of using a disaster to fix itself was so alien to their way of thinking that many of them could not even understand how it was possible. The system was saved in 4 days instead of 18 months. But here is the important part. When the Galactic Engineering Council studied what the humans had done, they discovered that the human solution was not just faster. It was actually better than anything they had planned. The humans had not just stopped the disaster, they had improved the entire system. The Malarian delegate slime trail had turned completely white, which was the Malarian way of showing total shock. How is this possible? She asked. How can a species with such primitive technology consistently outperform civilizations with millions of years of experience? Because we think differently, Day-ho replied. Your civilizations developed space travel after you had solved the major problems on your homeworlds. You achieved peace and stability before you reached for the stars. You learned to solve problems through careful planning and proper procedures. The light pictures changed to show Earth with all its chaos and conflict. Humans are different. We left Earth while we were still fighting among ourselves. We brought our conflicts, our chaos, and our problems with us into space. You see this as a weakness, but it is actually our greatest strength. Images of various alien homeworlds appeared showing peaceful, ordered civilizations. Every species in this chamber learned to solve problems in a safe, controlled environment. Humans learned to solve problems while everything was falling apart around us. When your world is peaceful, you have time to plan and organize. When your world is chaotic, you learn to think fast, adapt quickly, and find solutions that nobody else would consider. The ethereal collective energy patterns shifted to what might have been curiosity. Explain. This further human how can chaos lead to better solutions than order because chaos teaches you that the rules are not always right, Eho replied. When everything is breaking down around you, you learn that sometimes the only way to save something is to risk destroying it. You learn that sometimes the safe solution is actually the most dangerous one because it takes too long. He gestured to the display, which now showed human colonies scattered across the galaxy. Every human settlement exists because someone was willing to risk everything on an impossible dream. Captain Dong Haiyan, who established the first human colony in the Vega system, was told that the planet was completely uninhabitable. He went anyway and figured out how to make it work. Dr. So Young, who developed the terraforming techniques that made the Kepler colonies possible, was told that her theories were scientifically impossible. She proved them wrong by doing it. The Vorthic ambassador crystalline body was vibrating with what looked like barely controlled panic, but surely this recklessness must lead to failures, disasters, unnecessary deaths. Of course it does, Deho admitted. Humans fail constantly. We make mistakes, we take risks that do not work, and sometimes people die because of our decisions. But here is what you do not understand. We learn from our failures faster than you learn from your successes. The display showed a timeline of human expansion marking both successes and failures. The colony ship Tebek was lost trying to reach the Tau Ceti system. 40,000 people died because Captain Dong Haiyan decided to try an untested route through an asteroid field. It was a complete disaster. But the information from that disaster led to new navigation techniques that have saved millions of lives since then. The chamber buzzed with uncomfortable conversations. This was a completely alien way of thinking to most of the representatives. When you fail, you form committees to make sure it never. The silence in the giant crystal room felt heavy, like a thick blanket had been thrown over everyone. The alien delegates, who had been laughing just moments before, were now staring at the young human with expressions that ranged from confusion to anger to something that might have been worry. The Vorthic ambassador crystal body had stopped ringing and was now glowing with a darker light that meant he was not happy at all. The Molarian delegate's slime trail had changed from yellow to a deep red color, which was the Molarian way of showing that she was both angry and curious at the same time. The Kythera representative feathers had flattened against her body in a pattern that other bird-like species would recognize as a warning. Display Chief Judge Veltar, whose species had seen the rise and fall of countless civilizations, spoke with a voice that carried barely hidden irritation. Every word seemed to echo through the minds of everyone in the room like thunder rolling across a mountain. Human, you test our patience with your bold words. You stand accused of violating the most basic laws of galactic civilization, yet you claim to be some kind of savior. Explain yourself quickly, or we will move directly to your punishment day. Ho nodded respectfully, but his calm expression did not change. He reached into his simple cloth bag and pulled out a small device that looked like it had been made from spare parts. The device was clearly human technology, which meant it was probably held together with tape and hope compared to the advanced machines that surrounded him. Your Honor, I ask for your patience because what I'm about to tell you will sound impossible at first. But I have proof of everything I am going to say. He held up the small device so everyone could see it. This contains the complete records of human expansion into space. Not just the official reports that you have received, but the real stories, the ones that will show you why every single violation we have committed was actually us solving problems that threatened the entire galaxy. The Kythera representative feathers ruffled with what could only be described as indignation. Her voice was like music, but music that was angry and sharp. Ridiculous. What problems could a species that has barely been in space for 3 centuries possibly solve that we with our millions of years of experience could not handle? Day Ho looked directly at her, and his voice grew stronger with each word. That is exactly the point. You have had millions of years of experience doing things the same way. You have created a system that works perfectly for keeping order and preventing wars. But your system has one big problem that you have never had to face because you have never met a species like humanity. He activated the small device, and suddenly the air above the chamber filled with moving pictures that seemed to be made of light. The first image showed a star system with several planets that were clearly home to advanced civilizations. Cities covered the surfaces of the worlds and ships moved between them in organized patterns. 3 months ago, the Kepler 442 system, home to over 60 billion people from 4 different species according to galactic law. This system was under the protection of the Vorthak Empire. When a massive solar flare threatened to destroy all life in the system, the Vorthak followed the proper procedures. They filed the correct emergency requests, waited for tribunal approval, and began organizing an evacuation that would take 18 months to complete. The image changed to show the star at the center of the system. The star was clearly sick. Something was wrong with it, and it was growing brighter and more unstable with each passing day. The star was going to explode in 6 weeks. Sounds of surprise and concern rippled through the chamber. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats or floating platforms. The implications were horrible. 60 billion people were going to die, and there was nothing anyone could do about it using normal procedures. The human colony ship Sejong was in the area, led by Captain Min SEO. She had a choice: follow galactic law and respect Vorthak authority, or break every rule. In the book To Save 60 Billion Lives, she chose to save them. The light pictures showed a single human ship that looked tiny compared to the massive Vorthak vessels. The human ship was flying directly toward the dangerous area around the unstable star, while the much larger alien ships were maintaining safe distances using methods that the Vorthak called impossibly dangerous and criminally unsafe. The human crew evacuated the entire system in 5 weeks. They used technology that had never been tested, ignored safety rules that existed for good reasons, and violated 17 different galactic laws, and they saved every single life. The pictures showed human ships that were clearly not designed for what they were doing. The ships had been modified with equipment that looked like it had been bolted on as an afterthought. Humans were working in conditions that should have killed them, instantly moving people from dying worlds to safety with no regard for their own survival. Vorthak ambassador stood up so quickly that his crystal body made a sound like breaking glass. His 6 arms were waving in patterns that showed extreme anger. Those humans nearly caused a war. They ignored our authority and used dangerous methods that could have made everything worse. They had no right to interfere in our territory. Ho replied calmly, but his words cut through the ambassador protests like a knife through soft cloth. But they did not make it worse, they made it better, because while you were following the rules, those 60 billion people would have died. That is the difference between humanity and the rest of the galaxy. When we see someone in trouble, we do not ask permission to help, we just help. The chamber erupted with arguments. Some delegates were shouting about the importance of following proper procedures. Others were demanding to know why they had not been told about this incident. The ethereal collective flickered so rapidly that their energy patterns looked like a lightning storm. Chief Judge Veltar made a sound that somehow reached into every mind in the room and forced them to be quiet. The sound was not loud, but it was impossible to ignore silence. Human, you speak of one incident, even if your story is true. One act of dangerous heroism does not excuse systematic violations of galactic law. Ho smiled for the first time since the trial had begun. The smile was not mocking or sarcastic. It was the smile of someone who knew something that everyone else was about to learn. Your Honor, that was just the first example. I have 47 more, and each one shows the same pattern. Humans see a problem, humans fix the problem. Humans get accused of breaking the rules, but here is what none of you understand. Yet, he looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every delegate who had been laughing at him just minutes before. We are not breaking your rules by accident. We are breaking them because your rules do not work when real people are in real danger. And if you want to survive what is coming, you are going to need to learn how to break some rules. To the chamber fell silent again, but this time the silence was different. The laughter was completely gone, replaced by something that looked like fear. The delegates were no longer seeing Daeho as a primitive human who did not understand his place in the galaxy. They were starting to see him as someone who might know something they did not. The second case, Daeho continued, his voice now carrying an authority that made even the most powerful beings in the room pay attention. The Andorian trade route crisis. For 8 years, the Molarian Consortium had been trying to solve a dispute between 2 species over shipping rights. 8 years of Meetings, negotiations, and paperwork. Meanwhile, merchant ships were being destroyed, families were starving, and the entire trade network was falling apart. The Malarian delegate slime trail turned almost black with embarrassment. The situation was complicated. It required careful study of history and cultural differences. The situation was people dying, Deho replied without any emotion in his voice. Captain J1 of the merchant ship. Bizon did not care about history. He saw civilian ships being attacked and supply lines being cut, so he did what humans do. He found a solution that nobody else had thought of. The light pictures showed a human cargo ship that looked completely ordinary except for the strange way it was flying through space. Instead of trying to negotiate with either side, J1 started running supplies to both planets at the same time. He used human ships because we are not part of your trade agreements, so technically we were not violating anyone territorial claims. Within 2 months, both sides had everything they needed. The fighting stopped, not because of treaties, but because there was nothing left to fight over. The Kithara representative clicked her beak in a pattern that showed disbelief. Impossible. The economic effects alone would have destroyed the entire sector. Actually, it made the sector stronger, Deho corrected. Trade increased by 300%. Both planets are now more wealthy than they have ever been. And the best part, when the Malarian Consortium tried to take credit and impose their regulations, both planets told them to go away. They said they preferred doing business with humans because we actually solve problems, instead of creating more meetings about the problems. The chamber erupted again, but this time the arguments were different. The delegates were no longer dismissing human actions as primitive. They were debating whether these solutions might actually be better than their established methods. The implications were staggering. If humans could solve in months what took the established powers years to handle, then what did that say about the entire system of galactic government? The giant crystal room was filled with thousands of alien voices talking in languages that no human had ever heard before. Each voice sounded different. Some were like music, others were like metal scraping against stone, and some were just pure energy vibrating through the air. The room itself was so massive that entire cities could fit inside it, and the ceiling was so high that clouds actually formed near the top. In the center of this enormous space sat a single wooden chair that looked like it had been made by hand on some distant planet. The chair was simple and plain with no decorations or fancy designs. It looked completely out of place, surrounded by floating platforms made of liquid metal chairs that shifted and changed shape by themselves, and seats that were just balls of glowing energy. Sitting in that simple wooden chair was a young man named Deho. He was wearing regular clothes from Earth, just a plain blue shirt and dark pants that his mother had probably bought for him at some normal store. His shoes were scuffed and worn like he had been walking a lot, and his hair was messy from sleeping in uncomfortable places during his long journey to get here. Around him in a giant circle were the most powerful beings in the galaxy. The Vorthic Empire had sent their best ambassador, who was 12 feet tall with skin that looked like it was made of living crystal. When he moved, his whole body made sounds like wind chimes in a storm. His 6 arms were covered in golden bands that showed his rank, and his eyes glowed with a light that could probably burn through steel. The Malarian delegate was completely different. She looked like a giant slug, but she was clearly very intelligent. Her skin changed colors as she thought, and right now it was a deep purple that meant she was annoyed. Slime trailed behind her wherever she moved, and the slime itself seemed to be alive, moving in patterns that other Malarians could read, like writing. The Kithara representative looked like a bird, but she was the size of a human. Her feathers were every color that existed, and some colors that probably did not exist anywhere else in the universe. When she was excited or angry, her feathers would stand up and create patterns that was so beautiful they could make people cry just by looking at them. The most mysterious delegates were from the Ethereal Collective. They did not have bodies at all. They were just clouds of energy that floated above special platforms. The energy changed colors and moved in ways that somehow communicated ideas and feelings. Their thoughts were so fast that they could have entire conversations in the time it took a human to blink. All of these powerful beings were here for one reason: to judge humanity and decide what should happen to the human race. The charges against humans were serious. They had been expanding across the galaxy without asking permission. They had been starting colonies on planets that belonged to other species. They had been ignoring the ancient laws that kept peace between different worlds. The chief judge was the oldest and most powerful being in the room. His species had evolved beyond having physical bodies millions of years ago. He was so old that he had watched entire civilizations rise and fall like waves on a beach. His voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once, and when he spoke, every mind in the room could hear him clearly. Everyone in the room knew that this trial was just a formality. Humans were obviously guilty of breaking galactic law. Everyone had heard stories about how stubborn humans were, and how they refused to follow rules that everyone else followed. Without question, the stories said that humans were violent and unpredictable, and that they caused trouble wherever they went. The Vorthic ambassador stood up to speak, and his crystal body caught the light from hundreds of different sources, making rainbow patterns dance across the walls. His voice was like music, but music that was angry and demanding attention here. All knows this primitive species has shown complete disregard for everything we have built over millions of years. They spread across our galaxy, like some kind of disease, taking whatever they want without caring about the consequences. They have no respect for the treaties that our ancestors died to create. They ignore boundaries that have kept peace for longer than their entire species has existed. The other delegates made sounds of agreement. The Malarian delegate left a trail of slime that turned bright orange, which meant she was very angry. The Kithira representative clicked her beak in a rhythm that other bird-like species recognized as a battle song. Even the peaceful ethereal collective flickered with energy patterns that showed they were upset. Everyone knew that humans were trouble. The stories were everywhere. A human ship would arrive at a peaceful system, and within months there would be chaos. Humans would start asking questions that no one was supposed to ask. They would try to fix problems that everyone else had learned to live with. They would ignore authority and do whatever they thought was right. The problem was that humans had this strange idea called freedom that they talked about all the time. Other species had learned long ago that true freedom came from following the rules and knowing your place in the great order of things. But humans seemed to think that freedom meant being able to do whatever they wanted whenever they wanted to do it. Deho sat quietly in his simple chair with his hands folded on the plain wooden table in front of him. He had no lawyers, no fancy technology, no political allies. He was just one young man representing his entire species in front of beings who could destroy his home planet with a single thought. The table in front of him was as simple as his chair. It was made of wood from Earth, and it had scratches and marks that showed it had been used many times before. There were no holographic displays, no computer screens, no advanced alien technology. Just a young human and a piece of furniture that his grandfather might have made. The chief judge spoke, and his voice filled every corner of the massive room. Even though he had no mouth or throat or lungs, his words came directly into the minds of everyone present like thoughts that were not their own. Human representative, you stand accused of systematic violations of galactic law. Your species has been colonizing planets without permission, ignoring territorial boundaries, and disrupting the established order. How do you plead to these charges? The entire room became completely silent. Everyone expected the human to do what defendants always did in these situations. They expected him to beg for mercy or maybe try to make excuses for his species' behavior. Some thought he might try to negotiate some kind of deal to save his people from punishment. Instead, Ho stood up slowly and calmly. His chair made a small, creaking sound that seemed impossibly loud in the silent room. He looked around at all the powerful beings surrounding him, and his face showed no fear, no panic, no desperation. I request the right to present our case in full detail, he said. That followed lasted for about 3 seconds. Then the entire room exploded with laughter. The sound was incredible. The Vorthic ambassador crystal body rang like 1,000 bells. The Molarian delegate slime trail turned bright yellow, which meant she found something hilarious. The Kithra representative feathers created patterns that were so funny other bird species started laughing too. Even the normally serious ethereal collective began pulsing with energy patterns that could only be described as cosmic giggling. Some of the smaller species delegates were laughing so hard they fell off their floating platforms. Other delegates were making sounds that their species made when something was incredibly amusing. A full defense from humans. The Species that had barely learned to fly between planets a few hundred years ago. The species that still fought wars among themselves over things like religion and resources. The species that had no great achievements, no ancient wisdom, no impressive technology compared to civilizations that were millions of years old. The laughter went on for several minutes. Some delegates started placing bets on how long it would take for the human to break down and start crying. Others were betting on whether he would try to blame everything on a misunderstanding. A few were even betting on whether he would try to run away, but Deho just stood there waiting patiently for the laughter to stop. His face remained calm and his hands remained steady. He did not look embarrassed or angry or afraid. He just waited like someone who had all the time in the world. When the laughter finally started to die down, the chief judge spoke again. His voice carried a tone that suggested he was being patient with a child who did not understand how much trouble they were in. Very well, human, you may present your case, but be warned, this tribunal has more important things to do than listen to desperate excuses from a species that refuses to learn its place in the galaxy. More laughter filled the room, but it was quieter now. Some delegates were still chuckling and making jokes to each other about what the human might say. A few were already getting ready to leave because they thought the trial would be over quickly. Deho cleared his throat, and the small sound somehow cut through all the noise in the room. When he spoke, his voice was steady and clear, and it carried to every corner of the massive, space-honored judges and representatives of the galaxy. I stand before you not to beg for mercy, but to tell you something you need to know about humanity, something that will change how you see us forever. The laughter began to fade as something in his voice caught their attention. There was no fear in his words, no desperation, no submission. Instead, there was something else, something that made even the most powerful beings in the galaxy lean forward slightly too.